afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Jack, and this is Alex. He'll be loading the gun today. And this is the Fort Mackinac cannon firing demonstration. Now, before we get into loading and firing the cannon, I thought it'd be a good idea if we went over real quickly about what the soldiers would have been doing here at Fort Mackinac this time and what they would have been doing with this cannon here. So we are dressed for portray soldiers of the 23rd United States Infantry Company E, who would have been stationed here at Fort Mackinac between 1884 and 1890. And during that time, there was no concern of Native American attacks or British Canada coming down and annexing northern Michigan. Instead, their primary concern was the maintenance of the national park. So they were basically operating as half soldiers and half park rangers. And as a part of their military duties, that would include firing off salute shots with cannons such as these. So salute shots could signify most often the raising the flag in the morning or the lowering of the flag in the evening. Important national holidays such as the 4th of July, which was a big event during that time and still is a big event for the fort today. In more grievous circumstances, it could mark the passing of a former president, like the passing of Ulysses S. Grant in 1885, or in more joyous occasions, welcoming the first boat of tourists from the mainland after a long winter, as tourism was a huge part of Mackinac and Fort Mackinac's culture in the 1880s and 90s. So there was no concern of fighting with a cannon, but more ceremonial shots. And the gun that they used back then is very similar to the one that we have today. This model 1841 6-pound smoothbore field gun. Now it's a very long technical name, and they would have referred to it as we refer to it now as their 6-pounder. Now, looking at this gun, I can tell you that it does not weigh 6 pounds. But something about this cannon does weigh 6 pounds. Can anyone shout that out? Yes. This gun could shoot a 6-pound cannonball upwards of a mile. So if you can imagine from here all the way to the shores of Round Island up there. Now there is only one problem with that statement. As I said before, in the technical name, you might have heard the word smoothbore, which means there's no rifling or machine grooves in the barrel to give the cannonball any sort of spin. So that means that the smallest target that we could hit at that mile distance is roughly the size of Round Island. This was a terribly inaccurate cannon at that range, and it would have been more accurate at the half-mile range, about to that white lighthouse up there. And at that distance, the cannon could shoot at a ship-sized target accurately, maybe once out of every 3 shots. So still fairly inaccurate, but for the 1840s, this was a innovation for United States field artillery. This gun was a light artillery piece, and it was, if you see the chains on it, it was meant to be wielded around the battlefield very, very quickly and allow for, it was kind of part of the U.S. Army's flying artillery tactic, allowing commanders to wield and place artillery around the battlefield as the needs of the day developed. And so this gun would have seen a lot of combat action back in the Mexican War in 1848 and the Civil War, particularly on the southern side between 1861 and 1865. But by the 1880s, this gun is a 40-year-old antique. By the 1880s, the United States military has a breech-loading rifled artillery that can fire shells up to 5 miles away much more accurately than this gun. And so an Army surplus item like this would have been brought to Fort Mackinac simply because there was no tactical use for it. And it served best at posts like this for ceremonial shots. And I thought it'd be a good idea to fire this cannon off this afternoon in honor of you all being here today. Does that sound like a good idea? That sounds really exciting for people who are about to be honored with a cannon salute. But before we get to actually firing this cannon, we first have to go through a few quick safety procedures. The first step would be for me to take my thumb with this leather gauntlet and place it over the touch hole here at the vent of the cannon. This will allow Alex to bring the gunner's wormer auger down the barrel of the gun, and he's going to be looking for any remnants that might be left inside the barrel. Now, if he were to have found anything, it would have been historically inaccurate tinfoil. We use tinfoil here instead of muslin cloth because muslin cloth does have the tendency of catching on fire, and we don't want to send any burning debris down onto the heads of some poor romantic couple in Marquette Park right now. The next step will be to take this wet sponge and send it down the barrel of the weapon. This will be to extinguish any flames that still might be in the barrel of the weapon. This way that when we send the charge down, there isn't any accidental discharge that could have Alex have a really, really bad day. The next step will be to actually send the charge down itself. Now, we are going to be using 4 ounces of black powder for our charges today. Back in the 1880s, they would have used a 10-ounce charge. But we find with 10 ounces, that tends to be really, really loud, knocking paintings off walls, shattering glass, which isn't really good considering our boss works daily right next door. And then thirdly, it has a tendency to scare horses. And I don't know about you, you probably saw that there were a lot of horses down on Main Street. And we like to maintain a good reputation with the carriage drivers here on Mackinac Island. Now, we're going to wheel, now that the gun is loaded, we're going to wheel this into a firing position. Forward, march. So the next step now is to prime the weapon. This will involve 2 simple steps. First, Alex is going to grab a brass item known as a gimlet, and he'll send that down the touch hole of the weapon. This will be to pierce the top of the charge to expose some of the gunpowder so that when we send a spark down there, it actually ignites the whole charge and makes the big boom we're all waiting for. The next thing is we're going to use an ignition device known as a friction primer. Now, a friction primer works as a tiny grenade. You can see here there's a pin attached at the top, and at this juncture here, where the pin meets the metal tube, is a chemical known as fulminated mercury. When that fulminated mercury sparks, it ignites the rest of the gunpowder inside the tube, sending a flame down into the barrel of the weapon and igniting the charge. Now, all Alex needs to do is attach the lanyard and we'll be ready to go. So at this point, I would like to remind you all that this is a cannon. It may be rather loud. So my advice to you would either be to cover your ears or, depending on where your priorities and motivations in life are, pull out your cameras. And there are only 2 commands left to give. They are, ready, fire! And that is our cannon firing demonstration here at Fort Mackinac.